Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPaWrites here again, and today I want to rank all the ultimate weapons currently in the First Descendant, keeping a couple factors in mind as always. One, if you have a certain pairing that works really well on your character and you think it's underrated, feel free to let me know in the comments. I oftentimes will rate things not only based on how good they are, but also feel and fun factor. So if something is better than you think I think it is, or worse, let me know in the comments down below. I don't mind having that debate. I think all of these tier lists are subjective anyway, so if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear from you. But ultimately, I'm going to give my ranking and start off with the Afterglow sword. This sniper is very versatile, very good overall, and I think is solidly in the S tier. One of the main reasons is it's very useful no matter what character you are running. I think some of these weapons, unfortunately, really struggle unless you are using them in a hyper specific build. An Afterglow sword just feels like if you are doing sustained damage with it, it can be very effective no matter what character you're using. Now, some builds you're going to really hyper focus on abilities, so you might not use this on those builds specifically, but it can be good no matter what character you're running, which I think is very, very nice. Next up, we have the Albion cavalry gun. This is a machine gun that I believe is overshadowed completely by the Enduring Legacy. It is fine. None of the weapons on this list are going to be bad per se, but ultimately, some of them, in my opinion, could use a buff because some of the other options are just so dominant. Even some of the rare options, like a Tamer, like something like that, are just better, in my opinion, all around. Now, this one can be very useful in certain builds, with Sharon focusing on stun, or Ajax even, because of the perks that it has. But honestly, there's very few reasons to obtain this and build it out unless you're going for that hyper specific build, and that's something that for me is a little bit frustrating, just because I want to have weapons that I can use and move around a little bit. Because if you start investing a lot of your resources into a weapon and then that build gets changed or overshadowed in the future, it can feel like a waste. So that's where I do like weapons that are at least a little bit versatile. They don't have to be great at everything, but having fallback options to be good at a few different things is always a nice thing, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Blue Beetle. I'm hit or miss with scout rifles overall, just because I feel like they are useful in some content, but not a lot of it. And this is one that I think is fine. It's really better off in somebody's hands that's using Eugen. I think is the best option for this weapon. And if you have a build that really synergizes with it, it can be nice, especially because of the way it removes debuffs after using the unique ability. But you can also use it with a Bunny or a Valby. I just think with those characters, you're very rarely going to sit in one place and try to use a scout rifle where you have to ADS with it and to hit the weak points or the crits or whatever the case may be. So that's why it's not really as useful as those characters, even though its ability does synergize with them a little bit more than you might expect. Next up, we have the Clairvoyant. Now, some people have this rated higher than I do. I think the beam rifles in the game as a whole need a buff because they just don't feel all that great. I'm going to put this in C tier. It is not bad because of its synergy with Viessa. I think it can do well with some of the reducing of the chill element resistance, which makes it ideal for Viessa. But with her being the only Frost character in the game and not having a lot of other options, and honestly other weapons just outperforming this even with that, this can be a nice debuffer essentially, but it's not going to ever be a main weapon. And that's unfortunate for me because it's a weapon, again, that I want to use and want to love, but it just doesn't do the things that I personally want it to do. Next up, we have the Divine Punishment. This is an assault rifle, which again I think is in the B tier. Now, I do feel like there are some better options for assault rifles, which is why I'll drop it down just a bit. But this strengthens your defense when applying buffs, strengthens your firepower when applying debuffs, and reduces skill downs when healing. So it's naturally good with a Jaber or a Eugen who is going to be healing you very often. So it can synergize with those support characters. And I do think it's pretty solid overall. It can also be used in builds I've seen with Viessa as well. But overall, it's one that I think is solid. I think it does work, and I think we might see a buff in usage of this when we have more content where healers are a priority. Say you're taking on the mega dungeon that is supposedly coming. I think that's where this one can absolutely shine in the future. But for now, there's really not a lot of places where it's going to be super useful, so that's why it's dropping down just a bit there. Next up, we have the Enduring Legacy. This is a solid S tier option in my opinion. I think it's very good, and I think it's one of the more I wouldn't say underrated. I thought originally it was underrated for a little bit, but now it seems like everyone's caught on and realized that it's absolutely insane. If you use it with a Lepic or a Blair for its burn damage, it can be absolutely wild, but it's also good with SEMO and some other characters. But this is another one that I think no matter what character you're using, it can be very effective, and I like that as an option because it does feel like it's one that you can build out and really focus on with those specific characters, but you can also use it in a lot of other situations as well, which is very, very nice. And so some weapons, like I said, when they're hyper specific, sometimes they can feel a little bit disappointing because you spend a lot of resources. And unless you've been playing the game an absolutely insane amount, resources can be scarce, especially when you're trying to increase the amount of mods you can use on a weapon to really maximize what it does. So next up, we're going to talk about the Executor. This is a shotgun. In general, I think shotguns are a bit underrated. I think they're solid in the game, and the two main ones that are the ultimate ones that I like are pretty good. This and the Smithereens are pretty solid. I think Smithereens is better, so I'm going to put this into the A tier. This increases firepower and accuracy significantly when all bullets hit. Further enhances buffs when hitting electrocuted enemies. So naturally, you would want to use this with a Bunny or Sharon, and specifically with a Sharon invisibility build, when you can go invis and do that bonus damage and then hit all your shots with the Executor. This can feel fantastic, and that's where I think this absolutely shines. Same thing when you're using Bunny and you're just running around pretty much spamming her abilities. Being able to hit enemies with big damage with the Executor can be fantastic, and that's one that I absolutely think is a ton of fun and is a very useful weapon. Again, I just wish it did better outside of those two characters. Even though it's solid, it just really doesn't shine unless you are using them, in my personal opinion. Now we have the Fallen Hope. I've used this one a lot because I have been a Freyna main for the majority of my time playing the game, and unfortunately it's been surpassed in my opinion. I got this one early on, but the Python is just better as an option for Freyna. And the Fallen Hope, while it's good, I think it's not quite versatile enough to put it in the S tier because, again, it's great for Freyna. If you have it, I would highly recommend using it. I think it can synergize well, even using I've seen builds where you have the Python and the Fallen Hope on the character at the same time. But ultimately, I think the boosted damage against poison enemies is so specific to Freyna that it feels frustrating to use. Whereas the Python, not only is it good with Freyna, but it's good with other characters as well. So that's really why I'm going to drop this one down. I will say, though, for the feel of this as an assault rifle, it feels fantastic. I think the recoil on it, everything is just very, very nice. So that's one of the reasons that I'm going to put it up at A tier still. Even though it's not fantastic, it's one that I think is pretty solid. Next, we have the Greg's Reverse Fate. I think this is a B tier option. This is a tactical rifle. It's a burst option that I don't like the way the burst rifles feel necessarily in this game as much as I do the scout rifles or something that's a single shot or a full auto. It just feels like, I think coming from Destiny and other games where you can still hold down the trigger for the fully auto option, having to constantly tap this one feels awkward to me, and it just doesn't feel like it's all that great. Now, that being said, this works very, very well with Blair, and I think it can be really nice in the right builds. I just think it feels bad to run at times, and that's why I don't like it as much. So it provides artillery fire when hitting enemies with max shield, burns enemies hit with artillery fire, effective for clearing weaker enemies. So this is one, again, Not terrible, not anything that's that bad. And one I would definitely recommend chasing just because I think it is useful in certain situations. But ultimately, I'm not as much of a fan of this as I wish I was. And I hope the feel of those burst rifles is a bit better going forward because I don't care for them at the current time. Now we have the Kingsguard Lance. This is another beam rifle. Again, I don't like these whatsoever in the game right now, and this might be the weakest, might be my least favorite gun in the game currently, which is saying something. So this one, wide range attacks, deploys a Guardian Lance to disperse damage to nearby enemies when hit. And yeah, this one just feels weird. It's useful if you get it down. It is usable with every different character, but ultimately it just doesn't do anything worthwhile at this stage in the game. And I hope the beam rifles, at least this one specifically, maybe the Clairvoyants as well, get a buff in the future because I think they definitely need it, and I hope that is the case. This is a divisive one next, the Nezetra's Devotion. I've seen this ranked A and S tier in certain lists, and I've seen it ranked C and D tier in other lists. So I'm going to put it here in the B. I think it's fine. I like the hand cannons a lot more than I like the handguns, but for me personally, this one is fine. It's good for any character. It decreases enemy defenses when hitting their weak spot. Restores shields to allies at the cost of MP. Requires skill to manage when to shoot allies. So, again, this is one that I think is solid. It's not terrible. I think if used in the right build with the right setup, it can be nice. And that's why this one can be a little bit more hit or miss with people, is because if you don't want to go through the effort of using it properly, it can feel not great. There are just so many easy to use weapons that the setup for this one is not always worth the squeeze. Useful for all characters, any character can use it, but ultimately if you're playing a support build, that's where this one might shine just a bit better. And so that might be where you want to run this one, to be honest. But another one that in its own archetype, it gets completely overshadowed by another option, and that's another downside for this one because the Perforator is absolutely S tier. This one is fantastic. This effective against enemy shields, stuns enemies when their shields are depleted, high damage multiplier on weak spots, and increased crit rate. This is good for any character. Highly recommend running this in your builds if you have an open slot. I like it specifically on someone like Sharon because it does chunky damage and the stun synergizes with her very, very well. But ultimately, I do think this is useful no matter what character you're running, which is why it's so versatile and why I think everybody should try to pick it up because it is very, very nice ultimately. Now, not everyone likes the feel of hand cannons in the game. I've talked to a lot of players who just don't enjoy them whatsoever, and so that can be a little bit of the reason why it might not shine as much. You might not see it as much as some of the other options in the game currently, but for me, I think it belongs right there in the S tier. Now we have the Piercing Light. This is another sniper rifle, and it has a chance to remove enemy buffs when hitting their weak point, and 100% critical hit rate when hitting 2 targets with bullet penetration. This is another one that's good for any characters. I think this is B tier. It is so situational to use its critical hit rate when doing the over penetration. It sounds really fun. It sounds like a cool idea, but ultimately it's not really that consistent and something that's super useful overall. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's fine. It's a solid sniper rifle. I just think there's better options ultimately that you can toss on and run very consistently. Now we have what is my favorite weapon in the game. I mentioned earlier, I've been running Freyna an absolute ton, and this one is fantastic, and it's the Python. This SMG absolutely shreds. Very good on Freyna, really good on Glay and Enzo as well, and if you're really focused on weak spot hits, weak spot damage, works fantastic. Non-element and Toxic Descendants specifically really do well with the Python because of what it does. Now, the recoil can be a little bit off-putting for some people, but for me, I will never take this weapon off because my 2 characters that I'm running the most right now are Freyna and then Glay, and then Enzo is probably next on my list. Maybe even Jaber I could toss this on with as well, and it'll do very, very well. So yeah, I think the Python, you see it in a lot of builds, a lot of people running it right now. Very, very good, very nice feel to it, and one of those weapons that I absolutely love. And again, I probably won't take off anytime soon. Now we have the first rocket launcher, the restored Relic. This is an interesting case because I want to like this one better than more than I do. I think it's right there in the B tier. You can see the heaviest part of this list is going to be B tier. A lot of these weapons are upgrades to the rare versions, unless you're running specific builds for those rare versions, but they're just not able to shine as much as I would like. So this one has a chance to fire additional guided missile while shooting, and then the guided missile deals continuous damage upon hitting. Suitable for any character. It's pretty solid overall. It's just not one that I think has enough builds and enough, like, you really have to kind of lean into the playstyle in order to use this one effectively, and it's not good enough to do that, especially when you compare it to the Cigar's Proof, which is not on this list for whatever reason, but is the other rocket launcher. And this one is available in the Battle Pass, and you can get it fully upgraded if you complete the Battle Pass. So I would say the Cigar's Proof is going to be right here in the A tier, even though I don't have a thing for it right now, unfortunately. Yeah, the Cigar's Proof is just a better option as a rocket launcher. It is very good against weaker enemies, and then also the burn with Blair can be very, very nice as well. I just think the Cigar's Proof is also more fun to use, plus having it the ability to fully upgrade it is a big difference in what it can do ultimately, because you're going to be more consistent with its abilities than you will at the base level. So I think that's why it's going to be a bit higher for me. Now we have the Secret Garden. This is an interesting one. This is another one where I've seen people put it up in S tier. I think it's an A tier. I don't think it's as good as some of the other options. This is another tactical rifle. Maybe I have a bias against the tactical rifles. I don't know if that's the case, but this one is really good with Glay or Ajax, and it reduces skill cost for dimension skills and enhances firepower for tech skills. So that's really why I think this one slots down in A instead of S. Because while it can be fantastic, it's so hyper specific. If you're not running dimension and tech, then it's essentially not worth running. So that's really the downside for that. You compare it to, like I said, the Python or the Perforator or any of those, even then during Legacy, which helps to have burn as an option, but is still very effective no matter who you're running. I think that's really the difference. Whereas the Secret Garden just feels worse to me if I'm not running one of these other characters. Not quite as versatile in my opinion. I just don't like it quite as much. Now we're going to talk about the Smithereens. This one I think is the best shotgun in the game. I already talked about it a little bit. I grabbed the wrong one there, but yeah, the Smithereens is fantastic. So this one, the reason I think this is S tier, best shotgun in the game in my opinion, and ultimately a lot of fun. Guaranteed critical hit when all the bullets hit, increases shell capacity after a critical hit, higher DPS than the Executor, which is nice. Again, this is another one that you can run with all of the different characters, and that was another big difference, is that the Executor really shines with a lightning character, whereas the Smithereens can be good no matter who you're using, and I think that does ultimately make a big difference in how you rank these, because if you don't have a certain build with those other weapons, it might not be as have a chance to shine quite as much. Now we have the final masterpiece, and this one I think is right here in C tier. And the reason I say this is because I do not enjoy the feel of handguns compared to hand cannons personally. I think it's not great. Now, again, this one is useful with any character. I just don't see any reason. Like, I don't know why I would use this over a SMG, a handgun, or any other of the automatic weapons in the game, an AR or anything like that, SMG, anything. So that's why I'm going to drop this down. The ability increases the weakness multiplier and critical hits upon reloading. But yeah, ultimately, I just don't feel like handguns are all that good. If I could see buffs to two archetypes, it would be the beam rifles and the handguns for me personally, just because I think they both need it. Thunder Cage, this is S tier. You get this early on. It is useful with the lightning characters, so Bunny, who you guarantee to get early, Sharon, who you can get early. It's useful against bosses and also against single target enemies, as well as against mobs because of the lightning explosion, and it's just very good. SMGs, I think, in the game right now are very, very good. and I do think they are very useful, so I would definitely recommend using this, upgrading. If you get it maxed out, it's absolutely insane as well. And yeah, ultimately I think it's just a really good option, and it definitely is beneficial that you can get it early on and it plays so well, and it can pretty much, you can use that single weapon to clear the entire campaign to get to hard mode. That's how good it is. So I think that's kind of crazy, but ultimately, yeah, that one's very, very nice. Now we have the last Dagger. This is another handgun. C tier. I'm not, again, not a fan of handguns. Increases damage upon defeating enemies. Damaging enemies when fully buffed will stun them. So it can be decent. Maybe in a Sharon build. Maintaining buffs can be challenging with this one though, because the uptime and just the ammo economy with these weapons, the handguns, is not great. And ultimately they just feel like worse versions of other options we have in the game. So yeah, I just wish they were better, to be honest. And that's really why it's going to go down quite a bit for me personally. And then finally, we have the Wave of Light. This one I think is also a B tier option, and it's solid. It's solid. It's a good option. And I think a lot of people are going to look at this list and be like, "Oh, well, you didn't like a lot of these weapons." But that's not the case. I think they're fine. I think those at the top in S and A are just so much better that, like, the Wave of Light is not as good as the Secret Garden, in my opinion. So this increases crit chance after reloading, reduces enemy healing after when hit with a reload, and provides better overall DPS compared to the Blue Beetle. So that's why I would say it might be better than Blue Beetle. It's about on the same wavelength. It's good with any Descendant, but ultimately it's just not as good as the Secret Garden, in my opinion. Yeah, that's the tier list for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out tremendously. Let me know what I got right, wrong, and everything in between. I think this is a tier list that shows where we're at with the current meta. If you pick something in S tier, if you're gunning for that, it's going to be a very good option regardless of what characters you're running. It will shine in certain builds more than others, but not necessarily to a degree that they're useless in other builds. A tier, again, pretty similar, maybe a little bit leaning more towards focusing on certain builds. B tier and C tier, they are solid weapons, not terrible, not great, but they do shine if you build properly around them, and if you fully invest into B and C tier weapons, they can be very, very good. So just keep that in mind. Just like all the characters in the game currently, while they are not necessarily perfectly balanced, you can make any of them work. So if your favorite is lower on the list, that's fine. Just that's just the way it is in the game right now, in my opinion. Anyway, my name is Jopa. Have a good one. I'll catch you all later.